Welcome to the 21-day exercise and nutrition kickstart for vet professionals. My name is Aaron Shaw, and before we dive into the actual details of this 21-day kickstart, we need to review a little bit of the science. We need to get on the same page with why this is so important, why exercise and nutrition is so important for veterinary professionals. And if you're watching this, you probably already know why. Physical changes in our body matched with the high demands, the high physical demands, the unique physical demands of vet medicine is just this absolute perfect recipe for injury and burnout and frustration and aches and pains. The good news is that we can do something about that. And that is exactly why I created the Vetspan Collective as the hub to go to get practical, real information, actually having actionable information. No more lip service, no more make sure you take care of yourself and make sure you exercise and eat well, but actual specific things you can do today to extend your vet span, to extend the career that you have, where not only surviving, but actually thriving in vet med. We all know that there's sadly a high burnout rate. There's like this mass exodus from veterinary medicine because it's tough. It is super tough physically, it's super tough emotionally. And I created this community, and it is my mission to build the resilience of vet medicine, of veterinarians, technicians, nurses, support staff, everybody. The topic is near and dear to my heart. My wife is a veterinarian. I've got close friends who are vets and techs, and I've spent almost 3 decades now as an occupational therapist and strength and conditioning specialist. So I have rehabilitated many people in the vet field from the awkward postures and awkward physical demands that lead to tendonitis and aches and pains and back pains, and really kind of help, sadly, push people out the door too soon. We need you in vet medicine. Our pets need you in vet medicine. So we're here to do something about that. That is what the Vetspan Collective is all about. So thank you for being part of this community. So let's dive into some of the science here before we dive into the how to utilize this super packed, action-packed, information-packed PDF and videos that are associated with this 21-day action plan. First, we have to acknowledge that this action plan, this 21-day kickstart, is going to take change. We have to change the way we are, and as I'm going to explain here in a moment, we have to talk about change and be open to change because our bodies are changing. Our bodies aren't the same physiologically as they were last year or a couple years ago. And as we age, some things happen to our body that is, unfortunately, it's really a bummer. But we have changes with our muscles. We have changes with our mobility. We have changes with our strength. And so it even changes with how our body can manage nutrition and calories. We all know this. If you're anywhere near middle age, you realize that things are changing. So we have to change. We have to change the way we behave. We have to change the way we make decisions, things that we do and what we don't do. And this applies to you if you've ever said, well, I used to be able to do XYZ, but I just can't do that anymore. Or there are consequences to pay for doing that. Welcome to the game. We're all in this together. So change in exercise, change in nutrition. We need to make sure that these are simple, realistic, and sustainable. And I've got an image here of 3 what I think are really high impact, easy to read books that may help you with that. One is Atomic Habits by James Clear. I can't say enough about how impactful this book is. Again, it's a quick read, it's an easy read, and it really talks about how to make small, tiny changes that are sustainable. And when you don't follow these principles, you end up doing things like yo-yo dieting, yo-yo exercise programs, starting something, not being able to follow through with it. And so everything that we talk about here in the Vetspan Collective is making small changes gradually, continually, over time, so that they stick. So this isn't a quick fix. And even though this is a 21-day kickstart, it's not meant to be a wholesale change to how you feel and function. It's just to start us down the path, but do it in a kind of bite-sized pieces. The next book here is The One Thing, and The One Thing is really making sure that we pick and choose no more than one thing a day to focus, like to really have like as our main project or our main attention area of any one day. And that means not changing exercise, sleep, nutrition, stress management, communication. You can't change all those things in one day at one time. We're just going to really focus on one thing at a time. The third book on there is my journal. I journal, I write down what I feel, the things that I'm doing, and it's a nice way to reflect on if I'm sticking to my guns, if I'm sticking to really kind of what I'm trying to achieve. And it's a great way to reflect, looking back on days, weeks, and months, years prior, and to see how things have evolved. So I can become the person that I want to be, and it helps me stick to habits. So in this, we're going to talk about the why. So briefly, we're going to talk about the why, which is the science, which is education. So it's good to know if we're going to make change, why? Like what's the point? And that's where we're going to make sure that we know literally what is happening to our body as we age and how it impacts our work in vet medicine. And then we have to figure out how to do that. And that's where coaching comes in. That's where action comes in. That's where a 21-day action plan comes in. That's where this 21-day kickstart comes in, where we have a literal path to make sure that we can do what we know why we should be doing it, but how to do it, all we have to do is follow along. All we have to do is follow the plan. I spelled this what to do day after day after day and made it reasonable and actionable so you can be successful. So the one thing, atomic habits, very important. Let's talk about physical strain. The physical strain of vet medicine, you guys probably know some of these stats, and as I record this, these stats are certainly not getting any better. In fact, they're probably going in the wrong direction. But generally speaking, there's a bunch of studies out there you can look up, but at least half of vet professionals report feeling physically burned out by the end of their week. That is a red flag. If you have physical, sort of like the weight of the week is you're taking that home at the end of the week, that's a red flag. That's a sign your system is under stress. And maybe the demands of your work may be exceeding what you're really capable of doing. And that's where that risk comes into being injured. And certainly, it's nothing else, the risk of just being pooped out, frustrated, tired. And then if you go home for the weekend, all you can think about is trying to catch up on sleep because Monday's right around the corner and you have to go through the whole thing again. We need to be doing something about that, which is part of what the Vetspan Collective is about and what this particular program is about. Almost 3/4 of people report musculoskeletal pain in their job in a vet clinic, which I would say is nearly everybody. So everybody probably has some sort of ache or pain or back soreness or shoulder soreness or neck soreness or something like that. It's epidemic. And nearly all vet techs experience some sort of animal-related injury during their career. So to say that this is a rough and tumble sport, rough and tumble career, is an understatement. It is super challenging. I want to acknowledge that, and I'm going to keep acknowledging that. And I want you to think about, are you preparing yourself for how rough and tumble this sport is, this career is? So if we can all agree that, man, this is tough physically, it's tough emotionally, are you preparing yourself for that? And I don't mean just surviving, but are you able to thrive in that environment? Because here's some sad truth. Let's talk muscle mass. Our bodies change as we age. The image, this top image is the cross-section of a quadricep, kind of like cross-section of the mid-femur, of a 40-year-old triathlete. And what you're looking at here is the bone in the middle and surrounded by a bunch of muscle. It's beautiful. The middle image is the same cross-section of a 74-year-old person who is sedentary. And now what you're seeing is that there's a whole bunch of infiltration of fat, and the muscle is little tiny and flimsy and flaky. Not much going on there. Those muscles are going to be weak. They're not going to be able to produce much force, much strength. That person's going to have a hard time getting up and off the floor, out of a chair. Huge risk for falls. But if you look at the picture on the bottom, you can probably see the description there. That's a cross-section of a 70-year-old thigh right there of an active triathlete who's 70 years old. So you can actually gain and maintain muscle mass, which means safety and resistance to injury and durability and resilience with action. We're going to talk about that. The reality is that we lose 3 to 5% of our muscle mass, like the size of our muscles, starting in our 30s and 40s. So if you're listening to this right now and you're in your 20s, you're in the golden years, it's downhill from here. So that is the reality. That's what our physiology wants to do. So we need to make sure that we're taking action, doing things that will not let that happen, slow the progression of it, or even reverse the progression of it, which is absolutely possible. After 60 years of age, this loss of muscle mass accelerates. The story doesn't get any better. By 70s and 80s, we lose 30 to 50% of our peak muscle mass. So that's where you can think of being elderly, old, frail. We do not want that. But I want us to think about our muscle mass and then, of course, our muscle strength, which we're going to talk about here, in how we have to acknowledge the science that says, it's kind of a downward slope. But is it getting any easier to be in a clinic? Are dogs getting any easier to manage? Are those boxes that you're picking up and pushing and pulling and reaching over exam tables, is that getting any easier? And the answer is, of course, no. It's not getting any physically easier, yet we are getting weaker. Physiology is changing. So that is kind of a recipe for disaster. The decrease in ability in performance, yet this at least steady challenge of the physicality of vet med, it's a recipe for injury. It's a recipe for physical pain, which is the precursor to burnout. So we not only lose muscle mass, but we lose strength even faster. So I'll spare you all the details here, but basically we're talking about, 1.5% after we're 30 years old. May not sound like much, but it adds up year after year after year. We are tend to get weaker and weaker and weaker. And cumulative strength loss can be huge by the time we're in our 50s and 60s. Very, very risky. So there is a challenge that we have in being resilient, and the demands of vet medicine are super hard. I don't need to say this to you, but holding, restraining, awkward positions, bending, lifting, twisting. I mean, I've been at vet clinics and, watch vets and techs get contorted in the craziest positions. It's kind of like a couple of wrestlers who get kind of bent and twisted over each other. And sad to say that is the same position that the vets get in and the techs get in. So positions that you get in are what Olympic athletes spend years training to have the mobility and flexibility and stability and the safety to go through these positions. And that's just another day on the job in a vet clinic. That's just what you got to do. So we need to make sure that you are preparing your body for this, preparing your core strength to protect your spine. Back injuries are huge in the practice. We know that. We need to learn how to find our core. We need to make sure we have the mobility that we're practicing outside of the clinic. So when we do get into the clinic, we're good to go. So the big thing that I think about is athletes who we can probably agree have, peak levels of physicality. When it comes to preparing for that, they spend a ton of time preparing for game day. So they do a bunch of that on practice for game day, versus in vet medicine, it's kind of like just showing up for game day and not really doing as much preparation for that, which leads to injuries, burnout, and so on. So we need to do something about that. So this is what we're going to do. The 21-day kickstart. So we're done with the days of hearing the lip service, which I've been to many lectures in, veterinary lectures, conferences, and it is the same lip service of do self-care, eat well, and exercise. Great, we know that, but it goes back to how do we do that? Tell me how to do that. Yes, I understand we should be exercising. I understand we should be eating better, but how do we do that? So it's time for clear steps to improve our durability, our injury resistance, our resilience. And it's time for an easy to follow 21-day kickstart, which is exactly what this program, what this course is about. It's exactly a part of what this Vetspan Collective is all about. So stay tuned, click on this next course, download the PDF, and I'm going to talk you through the steps on how to get the most out of this 21-day exercise and nutrition kickstart made specifically for vet professionals.